happened to be, I believe, five or six affiliates in Ohio that got the grant, which is wonderful. And it's about raising awareness so folks can make the best decision for themselves should they be facing movement disorders, which you're going to learn more about today. So again, so excited to partner with these amazing affiliates and listen to what's going to come on this webinar. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. And I just want to let everybody know I did start recording because I almost forgot. And just happy to put in recording that this is a collaborative across our NAMI affiliates here in NAMI Lucas Greater Toledo, Wood County, NAMI, our NAMI 4 County, and NAMI Summit County. So super appreciative of the opportunity for us to come together and to fulfill this grant supported by Neurocrine Biosciences so that we can bring greater awareness around tardive dyskinesia. So without further ado, we're going to pause, check in with Jamie again, and then we will turn it over to our partner at Unison, Shelby, to tell us more about tardive dyskinesia. Jamie?
Okay, please tell me that worked.
Better.
All right, I'm going to switch computers, so I promise I will be back.
Okay, we'll check back in with you. All right, Shelby, thank you for joining us. Tell us about your role with Unison and take it away. Can you see, you have slides to share, correct?
Yeah, I was gonna try to share them right now.
Make sure you have access to share.
Okay.
Perfect. Yep, we can see it coming.
All right, can you guys see my screen?
Sure can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm gonna minimize this.
And I will keep an eye on the chat, but I'm gonna go off camera and off mic.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, my name is Shelby Montez. I am a psych nurse practitioner at Unison. I did my doctorate at the University of Utah. And yeah, now I'm working at Unison. I do the urgent care here in our Bowling Green office, but I do see patients in the Toledo, Wood County, like Hancock County. I do a lot of telehealth as well, but I'm in person in our Bowling Green office. So yeah, I was asked to talk about tardive dyskinesia today, which is something I'm excited to talk about. I think it's something we don't talk about enough, and it's also kind of complicated and it impacts a lot of people. So I'm excited to go into some more detail. So let's see if I can change the slides. There we go. So today I want to talk about what is tardive dyskinesia, or TD, and why it happens. And to do that, I'm also going to give you kind of a crash course on some like neuroanatomy and a little bit of kind of pathophysiology about, how the brain works, and then, why we use some of the medications that have been implicated in tardive dyskinesia, and then how we treat it. So we'll talk about signs and symptoms, risk factors, and then treatment as well. So what is tardive dyskinesia? Tardive dyskinesia is a neurological condition which is characterized by involuntary and repetitive movements of the body. It can manifest anywhere in your body. A lot of times people first start noticing movements in their face or tongue because there are a lot of small muscles in there that are really implicated in fine motor movement. So that's one of the earlier places it will show. But you can also get it in your trunk and your extremities, your hands, and things like that. It can be caused or worsened by some medications, and unfortunately, psych medications fall into that category, and we'll talk about that. And if ignored, it can become permanent. We've come a long way in like finding medications that can treat it, and ideally, we're better about screening as well. I know I'm screening for this all the time, but it's something that, yeah, we don't talk about enough. It impacts about 600,000 Americans per year. And of that 600,000, usually 60 to 70% of cases are mild, or symptoms are less maybe noticeable, and then 3% are severe. And I'm going to show a video example, and the video is great because it'll show like mild to more severe cases. But I kind of want to talk about what is happening with tardive dyskinesia, because I think it makes the movements make a lot more sense, and it kind of, I think it'll pull it all together a little bit better. So let's switch. I wanted to just show you, again, this is kind of where in the body tardive dyskinesia can manifest. And like I said, it's mostly in the fine motor movement areas. So people can also, it can impact walking, inability to like remain physically still. Some people might rock or kind of thrust in their hips or abdomen. But other things that aren't here is like difficulty swallowing. Some people have difficulty swallowing food, or it can impact the way they eat, and that can also be really uncomfortable for some people. So why does it happen? And this is where I was going to talk a little bit about some neuroanatomy. This is kind of a cross section of what our brains look like on the inside. And our brain has a lot of neurotransmitters, but today we're going to be focusing primarily on dopamine because it is heavily impacted or implicated in a lot of neurological and psychiatric conditions, but also is pivotal, or the key component that causes tardive dyskinesia. So there are 3 dopamine pathways in the brain that we're going to talk about today. There's more than that, but the 3 that we're going to talk about today are the mesocortical, the mesolimbic, and the nigrostriatal pathways. So the mesocortical pathway is this blue one that you see here. And this isn't like a vein or a blood vessel, but this is like a series of, millions of neurons that go from this area in the middle of your brain that produces a lot of dopamine into your cortex. And when we think about like the role of dopamine in this pathway, the cortex is responsible for a lot of our like higher functioning. So our brain uses dopamine here for executive function, motivation, planning. It can also be important for our judgment and inhibitions as well. And then the second pathway we'll talk about is this mesolimbic pathway, which goes again from this midbrain area into the nucleus accumbens, which is part of our reward pathway. It plays some role in like emotional regulation and addiction and things like that. And then the third pathway we'll talk about is this nigrostriatal, which goes from the substantia nigra area that produces a lot of dopamine into the striatum. And the striatum controls a lot of fine motor movements. So the first 2, the mesocortical and the mesolimbic areas, are a lot more like when we think of like higher cognitive function, things that make us human and impact our personality and our day-to-day function and our decision making and our consciousness. The nigrostriatal pathway is a lot more behind the scenes. We don't have any control over this nigrostriatal pathway. It's all happening pretty automatically, and it helps to like I said, control fine motor movement. And in this nigrostriatal pathway, there's lots of different types of dopamine receptors, but in the nigrostriatal pathway, our dopamine 1 receptors are kind of like a green light. So they're telling neurons to send go messages. And then D2 receptors are like a stop sign or a stoplight, the red light on a stoplight. And together they balance out. So we're getting enough green to enough red. So only like the movements that we want are getting through, and then it gets rid of excessive movements. But it's not that like they take turns firing. They're kind of both firing all at the same time. And it comes down to having a good ratio of green to red. So we rely on this system having a good balance. So now that we've talked a little bit about this neuroanatomy, I want to give an example of a condition and a medication, why we use the medications that may cause some tardive dyskinesia. So I'm going to use schizophrenia here as an example because the role of dopamine is a little bit more clear-cut than it is with, say, bipolar disorder or depression or things that we may also use antipsychotic type medications for. Schizophrenia is also, serotonin and other neurotransmitters play a role in this too, but we're, like I said, just focusing on dopamine today. So in schizophrenia, the mesocortical pathway, like I said, that goes from the midbrain into the cortex and is responsible for cognition and decision making and motivation, it's actually underactive, or that's the working theory. And so it causes negative symptoms. And when I say negative symptoms here, I don't mean like bad or undesirable. It means that things that should be there aren't. Something's been kind of taken away, for lack of a better term. So this could explain, like in schizophrenia, why people might have like a flat affect. So, you know, flat facial responses or limited reactions to things, anhedonia, which is difficulty enjoying things, or poor motivation, or low executive function. It's hard to get things done or stay on task. So it's low in this area, but in the mesolimbic area, which is, like I said, the reward system, as well as like fear and emotional regulation, it's actually overactive. And they believe that the overactivity of dopamine here is what causes the positive symptoms of schizophrenia. And again, positive here doesn't mean like good or desirable. It means that there's something there that wouldn't otherwise be. Other things that like cause high dopamine levels in the nucleus accumbens are substances that have been abused. So like high levels of meth also release high levels of dopamine in this area, and sometimes can cause hallucinations similar to schizophrenia. These are the two areas that are most impacted with schizophrenia. In the brain of someone with schizophrenia, their nigrostriatal pathway is normal. So there shouldn't be any movement difficulties or poor motor coordination. But so given that that's kind of what's going on with schizophrenia, the ways we treat this are generally antipsychotic medications. And the antipsychotic medications work by trying to target dopamine 2 receptors, either as antagonists, which kind of sit on these receptors and block them, or work like stop signs. But then there are also partial agonists, which I like to think of as kind of like a little crossing guard, like this guy down in the corner, because partial agonists sit on these receptors and they'll still allow dopamine through. It doesn't completely block it off, but it also prevents like an overwhelm. So we use these kinds of medications, and I think the next slide will go over this. When we use dopamine antagonism or partial agonism, the goal is to increase the activity of dopamine in this area where it's underactive, and that way we can improve anhedonia and like help people hopefully start enjoying things again, be able to make more decisions, maybe have more energy, motivation, things like that. But we don't want to increase dopamine everywhere, because that could make hallucinations worse. So our antipsychotics work to block dopamine in this mesolimbic pathway and stop hallucinations. When we turn down that overactivity and it comes back into a normal range, hallucinations and hopefully delusions may improve. So that's kind of why these medications have been successful for treating schizophrenia, but we also use them for bipolar disorder, or like I mentioned, depression. The part of the problem is we can't improve dopamine or change dopamine levels in these two areas without also changing it in the nigrostriatal pathway. So when we block dopamine in the frontal lobe, the mesocortical pathway or the mesolimbic pathway, we also block it in the nigrostriatal pathway. And because we're focusing on D2 in the other areas, it's also focusing on D2 in the nigrostriatal pathway. So now the red light isn't working as well, which means there's too much go and not enough stop. So there's more nerve impulses getting through that are telling the body to move, and not enough of that red light to stop or slow down that ratio of green to red. It doesn't completely block out all of the red light signals, but even just tweaking that ratio a little bit can throw things off. So I'm going to show you a video example. And I don't know that the audio will work, but I'm going to like kind of talk you through what we're looking through. So they're having her move her hand like this because it's part of the assessment, but you'll probably see her later. She has these hand movements still. In this video, they're wanting you to look at her lips here. You can see her tongue is moving or thrusting more uncontrollably, and she's not necessarily doing that on her own. But she's also got more frequent or harder blinking movements in her eyes that are part of this tardive dyskinesia. And she might be a more severe case. This woman also has tardive dyskinesia. You can see it in her lips here, but it's a little bit more subtle. You'd have to look a little bit more closely. She also does a little bit of this rocking in her abdomen, but it's hard to tell if she's just repositioning or if that is tardive dyskinesia as well. But they're wanting us to look kind of at her lips. Here's another example. They have her holding her arms out. Sometimes we'll have when we're assessing for tardive dyskinesia, we'll have people do other movements. So their brain is not as actively focused on suppressing some of these tardive dyskinesia movements. So you can see her tongue is moving inside of her mouth and her lips are still pursing. Sometimes it'll look like people are either blowing air out of their lips or they're like puckering their lips out like this. You can see she also had some of these cheek movements. Her blinking. Okay, this man, he's got some tardive dyskinesia in his neck. And so the muscles in his neck are hyperactive and he's getting these like, head movements that after time, it can become pretty painful, some of these muscles will like get stronger and others will get weaker and that can cause a lot of chronic pain. But he's also got these movements you can see in his lips and tongue. He also had some
Hey, Shelby.
Yeah.
Hey, Shelby. There's a question about lockjaw. Does that, how does that form? Actually, right here, you're talking about jaws. So
yeah.
How does that play?
So
Thanks for your
lockjaw, that is a great question. So today we're talking about tardive dyskinesia, but it's not the only form of movement disorders that some of these medications can cause. And the lockjaw is probably more likely what we'd call like dystonia. And it has some to do with that like dopamine level being out of order, but there's also other neurotransmitters like acetylcholine that some of these medications work on more than others. And if those levels are out of balance, it can cause like muscle tension or tightness and spasms. The mechanism behind it is a little bit different. It wouldn't fall under tardive dyskinesia. We'd put that under what we call like extrapyramidal symptoms, which are again like involuntary drug-related movements. And the treatment for like lockjaw would be different than the treatment for tardive dyskinesia. So a lot of times for like lockjaw, we'll use Benadryl or hydroxyzine or some of those other kinds of medications that also are a little bit anticholinergic, or like benztropine would be another option. Those options don't work for tardive dyskinesia. I hope that answered the question. And if it didn't, I can also talk a little bit more about it at the end too. Let's see. I was going to see if there's any more. His is more subtle. You can see he's kind of clenching his jaw in here. So I guess maybe kind of like lockjaw, but when I think of lockjaw, I'm thinking of like your jaw getting stuck open or stuck shut. But certainly teeth grinding for a long period of time can cause a lot of tension and make it harder to open your mouth. So we can see here her jaw's doing the same thing. Her eyes are blinking more. And you can see these are like repetitive movements. They're different than a tremor. Like a tremor would be like rhythmic, predictable, kind of the same thing every time, whereas these movements are bigger movements generally. and a little bit different every time, but generally in the same muscle groups. And then, let's see, this one would be like a very severe case because they've got neck movements, they've got mouth movements, they've got kind of these muscles around their eyebrows, and you can see they're having a hard time sitting still, or they're rocking kind of forward in their chair. We can't see their feet, but their feet may also be have some involuntary movement, so that could look like restless feet, like your feet can't sit still, or restless leg. You can have restless legs without having tardive dyskinesia, but some people will describe them as kind of the same thing. But obviously, like if you're moving that much, or those movements are as big and constant as they are, it would impact a lot of things. This can impact people's ability to feed themselves using, normal silverware, or like I said earlier, swallowing food might be difficult if all the muscles in your, or if some of the muscles of your neck aren't, swallowing food appropriately. I've had patients who feel self-conscious about their movements, or like when they smack their lips, it gets on their family members' nerves, and then they feel self-conscious. And so even if it's a severe case, or even if it's a mild case, meaning the movements aren't like noticeable to everyone, or causing muscle issues, or yeah, in that like kind of what we'd consider as severe, it can still be pretty disabling for people, because it can really impact self-confidence, or it may get on people's nerves, and it's something that is like totally out of these people's control. So even if they wanted to stop flexing their jaw, or puckering their lips, or moving their legs, they like physically cannot. So that's why it's so important to treat it. So I hope that the video helped give an example of what tardive dyskinesia looks like, but I feel like those examples also show you can see too much of that green light going on, and too many movements that are kind of escaping and getting through, that aren't self, or like the person is not trying to start those movements. There's too many like little breakthrough nerve impulses that are causing this. So risk factors for tardive dyskinesia. Tardive dyskinesia, it occurs higher, or the risk is higher, specifically for postmenopausal women, or people over the age of 65. You may be at a higher risk for developing tardive dyskinesia, depending on your exposure to medications. And this is a little more, we don't have great data for this because everybody responds to medications differently. So, historically we've said it's only like high doses of medications, or being on high doses for long periods of time, or being on multiple of these types of medications. But rarely some people can get it after exposure to one medication, or even low doses. And we'll talk kind of about what we do if or when people develop tardive dyskinesia. But also having a history of substance abuse, and more specifically medications like, or not medication, substances like methamphetamine or stimulants that also act on dopamine, at a higher risk for tardive dyskinesia. There are also genetic vulnerabilities. So any family history of tardive dyskinesia would put you at a higher risk, or if you have another like pre-existing neurological condition, seizure disorders, Parkinson's disease, those could also cause other movements as well. So you would be at a higher risk for developing tardive dyskinesia. And then people of white or African descent may be at a higher risk for developing tardive dyskinesia as well. Here's a list of some of the medications that are associated with TD, and this is not like all exhaustive, but these are, a lot of our antipsychotics. Some of these are older, so like haloperidol, fluphenazine, these are dopamine 2 antagonists and might have a slightly higher risk for tardive dyskinesia. Abilify and Vraylar are partial agonists, and so they might have a slightly lower risk for tardive dyskinesia. But some antidepressants, we don't fully understand why these may cause tardive dyskinesia. And then there are also anti-nausea medications like metoclopramide or Reglan has been a big offender. And this compazine is actually an antipsychotic as well, but I've seen it used for nausea back when I was working in hospitals and things. So anyways, that, like I said, that's not an all-exhaustive list, but those are some examples. So treatment options. So if I start somebody on an antipsychotic medication, or they come to me and they're already on something like this, and they either have or started to develop tardive dyskinesia symptoms, I'll first start by doing the risk versus benefit analysis and have a conversation with the patient, because obviously tardive dyskinesia can range from mild to severe, and regardless of the severity of it, it can impact people in ways we want to try to mitigate the risk for. So we'll kind of assess what their medications are. If the dose is high and they no longer need the dose that high, we'll try lowering the dose, and sometimes that will resolve the tardive dyskinesia movements. Sometimes if they've been on it for a long time and symptoms have kind of resolved, we can stop the medication if able, but that's not often totally feasible, especially for something like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder that's chronic and requires medication generally for good remission of symptoms. So we could either at that point switch to a different medication option, and hopefully one with a lower risk for tardive dyskinesia. So that could be something, like I said, maybe a partial agonist like Abilify or Vraylar, but they're, again, they can still cause it. Or clozapine, which is an antipsychotic that actually has shown some efficacy at stopping or reversing some tardive dyskinesia. But if we get to the, we have this conversation and we decide that the medication that we're using for their mental health is of more benefit to them than the risk of tardive dyskinesia, we can start a VMAT2 inhibitor. And this is kind of the gold standard for treating tardive dyskinesia. There's two options right now, generally, Austedo or Ingrezza. In the past, we didn't have these options, and so we were using things like benztropine or gabapentin or Klonopin. And they could help some with the hyperreactivity of some of these movements, but it wasn't really getting at the core root of the problem. And so we still use these sometimes, but they're a little bit less direct and less effective for treating tardive dyskinesia. So I wanted to just give it a little kind of rundown of why Austedo or Ingrezza might work. They are what we call VMAT2 inhibitors, and VMAT2 is the name of the transporter that pulls dopamine, and this is a picture of a neuron, into the neurons and packages them into these little bubbles we call vesicles. So if we're thinking of this as a motor neuron, and you're trying to make a movement, your body will send an action potential, which will bind this vesicle to the neuron, and it'll dump these little dopamine particles into what we'd call the synaptic cleft. This is the postsynaptic neuron, the next neuron that's receiving the signal and sending it on its way. So normally, when these action potentials are sent and the dopamine is released, it's only released for a millisecond, and then it gets pulled back in and packaged up again to be recycled. And then whatever wasn't repackaged or to be recycled gets broken down by enzymes that are kind of free-flowing in this area. And those enzymes are meant to prevent excessive dopamine stimulation. And the mechanism of action is a little bit more complicated than all of this, but essentially the idea is when we block these transporters, we're not pulling as much dopamine back into the neuron to be re-released each time. And so eventually that will lead to less go signals, fewer green lights, and it'll bring back this balance of green versus red. So there's not so much of a traffic jam anymore. People are kind of following traffic rules. The red lights and green lights have a more even ratio. So a lot of these movements, these excessive movements aren't getting through, and only intentional movements are able to kind of initiate a full action potential and send signals down to the next neuron. So fewer of these errant nerve impulses means fewer involuntary movements. It's a little more complicated than that, but kind of the simplest way to describe it. So these medications can work pretty quickly. and either reduce tardive dyskinesia symptoms or stop them altogether. And I've seen them work with pretty good success. Like I said, there's two different options, and some people respond better to one versus the other. And you know, if you have an allergy or something, you may not be a candidate for this. So we would go to something like I said, I like the benztropine, or sometimes we use amantadine or other treatment options. But like I said, this is where we like to start. So anyways, I wanted to include just a few resources. NAMI, the national website, has a good tab on tardive dyskinesia. It has more information about signs and symptoms, different treatments, and it has links to a lot of other good resources online. And then Teva and I think Neurocrine also has a website that talks about living with TD. This one had a big survey where they, surveyed people with tardive dyskinesia and how it impacts them kind of on a day-to-day basis. And it had some really interesting information. And if I had more time, maybe I would have been able to include some of it. But those are kind of the resources I used for putting this together. But I wanted to see if anybody had any questions. I haven't been able to kind of watch the chat. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer any of those now.
This was great. I really am always fascinated with science and wish I would have paid attention along the way to value this a little differently. So thank you so much for that. Questions, folks. This is really a lot of information. Some of it may be new to you. My questions come back in how do we support folks in awareness, or I don't know, how can patients themselves advocate for conversations with their healthcare about side effects? Do you have any suggestions on how to approach this conversation with healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, ideally to the healthcare provider, especially if they're psych, sometimes primary care will prescribe some of these medications, and they're prescribing lots of medications and lots of types of medications. So assessing for each possible side effect from each medication might be kind of tough. But in psychiatry, I was taught throughout school to look for this at each appointment for people who are on medications that could cause this. So each time I'm meeting with a patient, whether or not they know it, I'm looking for these movements, kind of comparing how they look today to how they looked last time. But from a patient point of view, if your provider hasn't mentioned anything about it, I think it's totally valid to say, I've noticed some of these movements, or my jaw has been doing this thing, or my legs, won't sit still, and I'm not trying to, shake them. My daughter told me that I was making a noise with my lips and I didn't mean to, and it's getting on her nerves. I think it's okay to be honest and upfront about what you're experiencing. And, I think there are just so many resources out there too. So some of those resources I looked at, it may be helpful for you to do some research or find an example of tardive dyskinesia that maybe looks similar to yours and bring it up with your doctor. And if they're not as maybe well versed in it or certain about how to treat it, they could either refer, if you're seeing primary care, ask for a referral to psychiatry or even neurology. There are neurologists who focus specifically on movement disorders, and so that's more than just tardive dyskinesia. That could be Tourette's or there's a lot of other things that cause movement disorders. And so whether that's getting a referral to psychiatry or neurology, either of those would be reasonable options. But ideally, primary care should also be aware of some of these signs and symptoms, and hopefully some management. But like I said, always ask for a referral, or you can even say, a lot of times I've had patients who come into my office and are like, I saw a commercial for this medication for tardive dyskinesia. Do you think I have it? And I've been like, yes, we've been talking about this, and let's try a medication if we can. And these medications have good efficacy. Sometimes it comes down to getting a prior authorization with insurance, but I know I've had a lot of help on getting, there are resources. So if insurance doesn't want to cover it, tardive dyskinesia is tough, and we can find ways to get things covered if we need to.
I
So-
appreciate that, Shelby. I
Yeah.
think empowering people to ask questions or even go into their doctor's appointment prepared.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're there to address one thing and we don't realize all of those other things may have really helped tell the story to our doctor. So being able
Right.
to, one, advocate for yourself, but also going into your appointment prepared and
Mhm.
realize that your voice matters in your healthcare journey. So
Right.
ask the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're not like, tardive dyskinesia is not your fault. It's not something that you're doing, and or you could just stop, or it unfortunately some people develop a lot of shame around their tardive dyskinesia movements or feel embarrassed talking about it. And so, if I'm noticing a patient do it, I also try to be sensitive about it. I might be like, hey, I notice your lip is doing this movement. I didn't notice this last time. Are you aware that you're doing it? Because I don't want to make someone more self-conscious about it, but also ignoring it or not talking about it leaves it to be untreated longer. And so I think it's always beneficial, even if it's embarrassing or uncomfortable or whatever. That's what we're here for. Let's talk about it. We can only help if we talk about it. So
Yes, thank you so much. I love dialogue and that's our path forward. So for the sake of time, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat, or we will have a little bit more time for Q&A in just a moment. But we really want to get into some personalized stories of how this has affected us and our families. So Maria, I saw you just pop off mute. Did you have a question before I move on?
Yeah, really quick. I know some of the dyskinesia is produced or initiated by some medications, but what can we do to help the ones that are part of their birth conditions, like Dandy Walker malformation or some other conditions that they do have these involuntary movements?
yeah, that is a great question. And I think for like congenital movement or movements related to another like neurological condition, that would be best addressed probably by one of those neurologists that studies movement disorders, because the source of the movements may look similar, but the source of the movements might be different depending on the condition. And so the neurologist will be able to, do more assessing of kind of the movements and understand how each genetic condition can play a role. And I know that like Austedo and Ingrezza have been used for like Huntington's chorea, which is a neurological condition that's more degenerative. Doesn't usually start at birth. You're born with it, but the symptoms don't show until later. But I'm not aware of any like on-label use of these for other neurological conditions, but not to say it's impossible. So
Good question. Yeah. And please be thinking of other questions, especially once you hear some of the personalized stories, it might bring up some other questions. And again, we'll have a few more moments for that in just a moment. Let's go ahead and check in with Jamie. I feel like this is our spot here. Jamie, can we hear you?
Has it been corrected?
Woo! Yay!
Okay.
This is
My
Jamie,
apologies.
everybody.
My apologies. Thank you so much just for your patience and flexibility. It was a system update. So
Of course.
once I
right?
restarted it, it took a while, but then it kicked in. So again, thank you for your patience and being flexible with me.
Awesome. I'm going to pop over to Wendy, and then we're going to finish off with your story and with your guest, and then you're going to sort of help us close this out. So I'm going to come back to you. Wendy, how about you pop on and let's hear from you. And thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Wendy, take it away.
Thanks, Mariah. Yeah, so I'm a family member, actually a mom of a son who was diagnosed with tardive dyskinesia just in the past year and a half. So I wanted to give you a little bit of insight about how we got here. When my son was at a very young age, he, started getting a list of different diagnoses. Age 6, ADHD, age 9, Asperger's, age 15, bipolar. And as these conditions kept coming and we were trying to find ways to get him help, many of those ways were with medications. Several that were listed on the screen. And of course, anyone that's familiar with mental health and knowing how medications work, it's not a one and done or a one size fits all. It was truly trial and error. And by the time he was 18, ready to graduate high school, life had changed. We finally had that right recipe. Things were looking really good for him. And I was really thrilled. However, as that social awkwardness that he always carried with him from having those diagnoses carried on into his adult life. He just wanted to fit in and be like everyone else. And as he gained community employment and grew older and wiser to what goes on in the world, he decided to go down a dark path, to got off his medications, friends that he shouldn't have gotten involved with, and made bad choices. That took us down a real dark highway for a number of years. So I tell you that because one thing that's familiar with tardive dyskinesia is substance use. And we went through many years of that. He did finally get treatment. We've had a good past couple of 2 years, as I mentioned before. And yeah, it wasn't until he had started a new medication about 2 years ago, we thought, yes, we finally have the right recipe again. He's actually feeling really good. He's functioning well. A lot of the things, with autism, there's a lot of stemming and things like that in the movement. With the ADHD, really hyper, talks real fast and couldn't be organized and get his thoughts together. All these things suddenly started appearing about 6 months after one of his medications, his new medications he'd been on. And because of his earlier diagnosis being a mom, I'm thinking, why is all this coming back? Well, that's just him. That's just typical behavior for him. Not realizing that it could be TD. Now, I had learned about TD a couple of years ago when I met Suzanne Robinson and we were granted this awareness piece. And I spent a lot of time on talkaboutTD.com. And knowing that and realizing what the symptoms were when my son began grinding his teeth, not just once in a while, but nonstop. And these other symptoms started showing up, the constant rocking and just the inability to, follow through on things. It was very concerning. So we went to, he's got a great doctor. She's actually a nurse practitioner, but she does really well with him. And she knows a lot about substance use too, misuse, I should say. I didn't have to bring it up. It was on my list, but we went to the doctor together and she says, what's going on? What's all that clicking? I mean, she picked up on it immediately. You haven't been doing this. And sure enough, she says, that's TD. So we were given Ingrezza, and that's what he was on very successfully for quite a while. Unfortunately, today, he's having a lot of issues because of a TBI, we believe. We've been to many neurologists. He's being seen at Cleveland Clinic, UTMC, and Wexner, because we're trying to find out what's happening. His balance is way off. He walks with a cane right now. And, we had to stop the Ingrezza because he was getting Parkinson-like movements, but it's just a matter of elimination. He didn't want to quit the Ingrezza. He didn't want to stop that. He felt like that was the first time he could be normal and not be that annoying person at work who's constantly grinding his teeth and the one that the girls don't want to go out with because he's always making noises or moving. But today, we have hope, like with NAMI, we always have hope. And we do believe that we'll get answers, and it is related to something other than TD. But we're just grateful that, we had a practitioner who was aware, and I'm grateful that I knew what to look for. And I had learned so much, not only through Suzanne, but just by, going to the talkabouttd.com website. So I just wanted to share that with you today.
Thank you, Wendy. I think so much of our opportunity to destigmatize all the things in life is just more honest and vulnerable conversations. So really appreciate you sharing that story. I just want to pause and say, and just check in with Shelby. Did you have anything that you wanted to comment on in regards to Wendy's? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, this is kind of you brought up a good point. You can have tardive dyskinesia and other movement disorders as well. So there's also drug-induced Parkinsonism, which we didn't talk about at all today. And that's more tremors and difficulty walking. And like there can be difference, or you can have neurological conditions that cause other movement issues as well. So I have had some people get on Ingrezza and their tardive dyskinesia moves away, but then now that they're not doing these big movements, they're noticing, oh, I have a fine tremor in my hands. And is that because the Ingrezza causes a tremor, or is it because I have another underlying movement issue? You can have both. And so it's tough because psychiatry is never clear cut, like you said. No one medication impacts everybody the same way. No two people with tardive dyskinesia will look the same way or act the same way. And so, it's a lot of trial and error, and never as clean cut as we wish it would be. But it sounds like you've got a great team of people helping him get it sorted out. So I wish them best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's, we just never give up hope. But yeah, it's unfortunate because of someone young and in their 30s who struggled their whole life with these different issues, just it'd be nice to finally get answers, but we'll get there.
Before I did psychiatry, I was in the neuro ICU. I worked as an ICU nurse. And so I also saw a lot of the impacts of traumatic brain injuries and things too on movement and mental health and all of that stuff too. And that impact can't be understated either. So anyways, I hope you guys get some answers and some treatment, but it sometimes can be a little bit of a, like you said, trial and error. So I hope you guys get moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think we're heading there. We're just grateful that we did find something that gave us that relief for some time. So while we explore the other things, we'll just keep looking.
I think what's also a testament that I'd like to take a moment to call out is that often in our journeys and in our times of uncertainty or just being overwhelmed in a moment, we often feel like we're the only ones going through that hardship. We're the only people that can relate. And what's really special about NAMI is this is where you're not alone. And so many of the families that we serve are like Wendy, are parents of children, adult children. And that adds its own added complexity and just the weight that we carry as parents. So again, I thank you for sharing, Wendy, because I think there is so much opportunity for us to say, wow, I didn't know somebody else has gone through this, or that was really hard. I empathize with you. Can you tell me what I should do in that situation now that I'm facing it? I think there's a lot of value in our shared experiences. And that's a key premise of our support groups is there is healing in sharing our experience. So thank you again, Wendy. Appreciate you.
You're welcome.
All right, let's turn it over to Jamie and your special guest. Go ahead.
Right, wonderful. Thank you, Mariah. Shelby, thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation and hearing that you had received some education centered around TD during your career, because that's the common theme for us is that people have never heard about it. So I loved hearing that you got some of that education. And Wendy, it was lovely seeing you this morning at breakfast. So thank you for sharing your story and being vulnerable with us today. So I'm very excited to share with you. I'm going to introduce Carl. Carl and I have been acquainted since 2018, and our paths just continue to cross in our community. My coworker Sarah and I had the pleasure to sit down with him a couple weeks ago, and he just was very kind and willing and vulnerable to share his story and experience with us as well as with everyone here today. So I'm going to introduce Carl.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm Carl. Well, my story is I have a taco dyskinesia, and I started taking psychotic medication about the age of 15. And over the year, I had been taking different kinds of medication. When I first discovered that I was having problems due to taco dyskinesia, I was trying to go to sleep one night and I couldn't get comfortable enough to go to sleep. And I had a doctor's appointment coming up, and I told him what was going on, and he told me that I had taco dyskinesia. And I mostly have it in my neck and my mouth area. And I seen some of the medications you listed. I have been taking some of those medications over the years. To deal with it today, sometimes it's difficult. I mostly try to live with the best I can. I know it's something's going to be with me the rest of my life. Then sometime when I go out in public, people stare at me in different ways, especially the little kids. I don't think they understand. But the best way I deal with it is taking it one day at a time. I know it's going to be there for the rest of my life. And I realize that there's treatment for it. I taking drugs, it helps. I also went and saw a neurologist. They suggested Botox, but it's very expensive. So I was on that for a while, but I had to stop taking that because I couldn't afford it. But I learned to live with it. It's something you have to deal with. And I tell those people who some look at me and they think I'm retarded or something. And sometimes that bothers me in the social life. But I learned to be more outgoing with it. I think it helps me to get out and community. I go to meetings and stuff like that to be around people, and I walk a lot. I try to take my mind off the pain. Sometimes experience some days are better than others. I have my good days and I have my bad days, but I've seen some couple of people who have taco dyskinesia. When I come down with it, I hardly knew anybody. I come down to community support and mental health services. And I seen one girl that had it, but when I first come down with it, I didn't know anybody that had it before. It can be very habilitating to you personally, but I learned to deal with it. It's something that you have to deal with as long as you're living. It gets hard sometimes. So I also I sing and I used to sing in a choir and I sing with different groups. So people wonder how I can sing with the movement in my mouth. They're amazed that how I can sing. I got a beautiful voice. I sing in the choir and I sing at Akron U with a mass choir a couple of years with an orchestra. I sing with Akron U for a little well, over about 5 or 6 years. And I try to I try to get out and meet people in at different walks of life. I don't shy. I try not to shy away. Some people back themselves in their house or their apartment and don't go out. And I think that's the worst thing you can do. The best I can tell you is to keep taking your medication and it'll get it better. It used to really be bad when I first come down with it. I was biting my tongue. I could hardly swallow. my speech was impaired, but now I feel much better with it right now. I just tell those people never give up hope. And that's all I got. Thank you.
That was amazing. I really appreciate your offering there. And we've got a couple of folks with their hands up, so we're going to turn it over to were their hands up? I thought I saw hands up. I have a question that I think actually you answered. My question was going to be back to Shelby, and I think you answered it though, is that are there supports or lifestyle changes that can help manage TD? And what I heard you say was that you tried Botox, but you've learned to live with it. You get out and walk, you distract your mind. I love that you didn't give in to isolation and that you sought community. You just kept putting yourself out there. So, and that you sing. I think all of those are really important lessons for us to hear, that there are things within our control. Botox might be very expensive, but there were other things that you've done to cope within this, like staying active and involving yourself. So I just want to give you another round of applause because truly it would be easy to succumb to the stigma and the difficulties and all of that. So you've done an amazing job being a testimony. And I love that the most important message is never give up hope. So thank you so much for sharing that. Does anybody have any questions? Wonderful.
I do.
Yeah, go ahead. Please, Maria.
I want to ask Jamie, to your guest, did he try the doctor change his medications that was causing him the dyskinesia?
Yeah, they found that some of the medication that I was taking, I no longer take it. They found alternative medication that can deal with my psychiatrical problems that was causing the tardive dyskinesia. They discontinued them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes stopping the medication can help the movements go away altogether, and sometimes the movements can stay even when someone's no longer on any medications. And so that's why, yeah, I'm glad that there are now options for treating tardive dyskinesia, because before Ingrezza or Austedo, our options were a lot more limited. But I'm glad that the Ingrezza has helped you, Carl, with those movements.
Thank you.
And you're on a better medication regimen, so it's not getting worse.
I wish we had more people willing to share their story, because I think so much of our stigma that still exists, we know that half the people that need treatment in general for mental health don't even get it. So one, thank you for seeking help, but also in sharing that story with all of us, because I think it's really important that we learn from each other, that we just realize that all of us have to learn to take things day by day. So thank you again. Jamie, I want to turn this over to you, because I think you've had some direct experiences at an advocacy level to help us in this space. So I wanted you to tell us a little bit about what that work looks like, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Mariah. I had the amazing opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. in April with a group of us. I believe there were 10 executive directors across NAMIs that all gathered, and we were split in groups. And so it was myself, another NAMI executive director from Kentucky, and then we had a family member, and then their daughter was with us as well. And so we were placed with the different legislators to go in there and really advocate for what we were trying to do. And so it was a lot about education, a lot about awareness. You know, it's estimated that 800,000 people in our country have TD, and over 60, just about 60%, a little over 60% are undiagnosed. meaning individuals do not have answers to their condition or do not have those answers, or those people in their corner, on their treatment teams, explaining to what they're experiencing and what they're going through. And so again, I can't thank Shelby enough for, just hearing her experience, that there are individuals out there coaching and training through that education process. And so that is what some of our advocacy was centered around. We really want all doctors to have the screening forms, all doctors to be sharing the risk. Hey, this medication may reduce this symptom and this symptom if you're diagnosed with schizophrenia, schizoaffective, or major depressive disorder, but there is a risk of developing tardive dyskinesia. And what does that look like? What does that even mean? Talking to them about the involuntary movements. Carl, you did such a great job. He touched on the mental health aspect of it, of this is what, it does to self-esteem. So we really educated the legislators on just wanting that message out there, having that pre-screening available. And thank you to Suzanne for being here with us today. Neurocrine gave us some amazing leave behinds and information. There is a screening form available, and I was able to hand them. I believe one of our board members is joining us today. Her name is Naomi, and she currently works at Cleveland Clinic, as well as we have another local doctor here on our board, Dr. Boldy, who I'm also going to be giving some of that screening information to, so we can continue to raise awareness and have that information available. Really was able to talk about those barriers and access to care, and we tied that into some Medicaid concerns because we do know the impact of Medicaid and the value that brings to someone that has tardive dyskinesia. So we touched a little bit on that. We talked about how legislators could support our efforts with promoting TD, with TD Awareness Week. We actually shared some of the TD toolkits with some of the legislators, and we're really impressed with how engaging they were and how many questions that they asked. And of course, how many did not know, had never even heard the phrase tardive dyskinesia. So I really think it really generated some great conversation there. We also talked about, we actually directly asked for $500,000 to be provided to SAMHSA to provide technical assistance for certified community behavioral health clinics. So we did have that specific ask in there. We asked for the funding support of the training of all healthcare providers to continue to provide this routine screening and make sure they are looking for early intervention for TD. So I love, Carl, that you did touch on that your healthcare provider was able to kind of recognize that and talk you through that. And then we also talked about critical knowledge gaps in frontline behavioral health care and how education can enhance the patient safety and well-being, again, ultimately leading someone to receive the best care when they are diagnosed with TD. And of course, we really touched on protecting, again, Medicaid in this process. In our group was somebody with lived experience. So we had the family member and then their daughter, and they both they started a foundation and are pretty active in our community in speaking about TD. But they were able to kind of give a good visual of what is it like, kind of similar to Carl just shared with us. What is it like living with TD? And then what is it like for the family member perspective as well? So that was our experience with advocacy around tardive dyskinesia in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so you kind of like, I didn't know this was going to go there, but I'm totally going to take us there. Could you tell us, what does NAMI do around advocacy and preparing others for advocacy? And then do you want to talk about NAMI Smarts?
So I have NAMI Smarts, but I also have fabulous talking points. The Patient Center for Advocacy did an amazing job at helping us set everything up, as well as NAMI Ohio and NAMI National. I'm in the Ohio region, so NAMI Ohio does a great job at setting up our meetings for us, being able to try to help us engage with our local legislators. So that way we can have that face-to-face, and then we can see them more often in the community. So then you start to build relationship with your legislators. But everyone is always very accommodating in giving us those talking points. But of course, we do have the NAMI Smarts for advocacy as well, that I am trained in, and I'm sure that Mariah is as well.
Yeah, as I've taken on this role, what has resonated with me is people feel invisible, their voice doesn't matter, and nobody cares. And the turnout on this call proves people care. So it's not the truth, but how do we give people voice? How do we let them see that we value them, we hear them? And I think training them in how to tell their story is part of that. So NAMI Smarts is a phenomenal opportunity. I know in Northwest Ohio here, we're going to be trying to pursue some of that a little bit further in 2026. But there are so many options for involvement and engagement at different levels throughout NAMI, because your voice does matter. And everyday people are how we bring about change when we come together in these spaces. So are there any questions about the legislative efforts around TD that Jamie might be able to answer? Thank you for taking on that work. I will tell everybody in this space, this is why I came to NAMI, is our national advocacy platform is strong. And so this is really our opportunity. How do we bring others into this mission? Each and every one of us from our different NAMIs are very small but mighty. And when we come together collectively with our voice, we really have the opportunity to make a difference. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We are going to just quickly tap into, we'll start with NAMI Wood County. And if you have any upcoming events or calls to action or anything to close out the year that you want to share with us, take it away, NAMI Wood County.
Yeah, thank you. And the presentations are phenomenal. Thank you all to everyone for sharing your story and this great information today. Before I share NAMI Wood County information, I do just want to put another reminder that we have the evaluation link in the chat. If you are someone who is seeking CEs for counselor, social worker, marriage and family therapist, please, please, please complete the evaluation. That is how you can ensure that you're going to receive credit for today's presentation. And with that in mind, at NAMI Wood County, we are looking to host a few more webinars coming up in the winter and throughout 2026. So if you are interested in that, keep an eye on our social media, our website. We'll have more information on that. And we can share some of that too after the presentation. Some other things at NAMI Wood County that we have coming up, we are doing a fun little fundraiser. So if you're in the Northwest Ohio area, we are doing cookies and crochet. So it's like a guided painting, but it's a guided crochet, if you will. So we're going to be making fun little fidget tools out of crochet and beads. So I can put the link in the chat to that, or if Bree beats me to it, she can do that too, since I'm just apparently talking. And we'd love to have you if you can come. And yeah, Bree put the information for our website in there. So check it out. If you are in Wood County or looking for Wood County services, we'd love to talk to you, engage with you in some way. So thank you all again for being here, and I will stop talking.
All right, thank you, Courtney. So we will have, I will send out links to each of our NAMIs, as well as the recording, as well as the evaluation link. And Suzanne, there was our TD week in October. I can send out that little toolkit, but there was an amazing webinar and presentation that NAMI Texas did. Think anybody would care if I sent that around? I think we can probably send that too. It's beautiful. Good. Okay.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's what they're also recipients of that TD awareness grant. And we definitely encourage that cross-pollination, because you just never know. People have great ideas, and kind of raising the awareness so people, because I didn't say this, but I'm a family member too. Mom has bipolar disorder, has had psychotic episodes. She's 87. She doesn't have TD, but her psychiatrist, every time she sees him, he goes through the AIMS evaluation just to make sure. So it's important information for people.
Thank you so much. All right, Wendy, what do you have coming up or that we should be aware of?
Well, it's been a super busy year this past year for all of us, but especially with us and our small staff over here in the 4-county area. So we do have events listed on our website, nami4county.org. There's a free monthly presentation if you're willing to come over to Archibald area. We do that every month. It's a community program. It's just sit down with a local provider or somebody from our area to, present on a specific topic that the community really seems to enjoy. So we have that going on. And as we, again, wind down, I'm gearing up for Washington, D.C. I go there to advocate every year, and I'll be doing that the first week of December with a lot of other executive directors from across the country. And Suzanne, I'm sure you'll be there, right? It's a great opportunity to just start regrouping and planning for our new year. And our efforts to bring that awareness about TD are continuing at every presentation and every support group and everything we do in our community. There's a little awareness piece that goes out with it, whether it's in a Dum Dum Sucker, which is part of my hometown, or just a brochure. So that's what we got planned.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to just close it, say something, and then I'm going to have Jamie close us out. So Northwest Ohio and NAMI Greater Toledo, Lucas County, we have had a very busy summer as well. And this is our time to, dare I say, breathe a little bit and really dive into the infrastructure and our strategy for next year. Our big focus area is how we engage with volunteers. We cannot do this work by ourselves. We need everybody to be part of this mission. So how we engage, how we communicate, that's really our focus, is to make sure there's plenty of opportunities for people to jump in to the work here. So if you are interested in volunteering, please reach out. As you noticed, NAMI Walks is on my background because it has already launched for May of 2026. So that is where our mind is just planning ahead and figuring out how we can continue these collaborative efforts across the state. So thank you for having us. Thank you for listening. And Jamie, close us out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I second that. Thank you everyone for being here and just taking time to learn more about what we do with NAMI advocacy surrounding tardive dyskinesia. I will be joining Wendy and Suzanne for advocacy again during the first week of December in Washington, D.C. I love doing advocacy work. I feel that it really does change things. Just being able to get the information to the right people that can help make those big changes and those decisions is really, really important. So I'm excited for that. I would say we are preparing for 40 years of NAMI Summit County next year. So I am kind of trying to brainstorm a little bit and see, some of our history and putting together some amazing posts, social media. So if you'd be so kind as to follow us on social media, we are on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Of course, you can always sign up for our newsletter. We typically try to send out great information weekly, but that's going to be our biggest focus, is just highlighting our organization went from all volunteer to now 2 full-time paid staff, with the legacy and the foundation that was built by our previous directors, Leslie Sawyer and Ron Rett. So we are incredibly grateful to carry on some of their wishes and their vision and really expand the reach. So 40 years of NAMI Summit 2026.
Any final questions? The gift of time is the best gift we can give each other. So 10 minutes back. Take time to go to the bathroom now. Thank you, everybody, for all of your time and attention. Really special thanks. Yes, thank you to Carl. Thank you, Wendy, for sharing your story. Thank you to our sister affiliates and all of you for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thank you. Excellent.